back again to give you guys an update on how my vampire reads are going. I actually meant to do this halfway through the month, but I was just so busy. I just couldn't find an opportunity to sit down and do any booktube videos at all. So I'll just go through, I'll just start with all of the books I read first. So let's start with Castle in Transylvania, which believe I already started when I made my little vampire TBR video. I got about 10 pages in on this book, and then Shawn had finished it and told me that it wasn't about a vampire at all. It wasn't even about a zombie. The synopsis clearly describes a vampire. And on the front, it says the original zombie story. So it was actually about neither one of those things. So I originally was going to go ahead and finish it since I'd already started it, but I was only 10 pages in and I changed my mind. I'm only giving myself 2 months to read as many of my vampire books as I could, and I just decided I didn't want to waste any time on a non-vampire book. So I just went ahead and set this aside, and I do still want to read it though. So I'll pick it up another time and read it then. So the first actual vampire story I read was Clairemont by Théophile Gautier. I'm probably still butchering that pronunciation, but that's as close as I can get it, which is a short story. I believe it's about 45 pages long. So I can't really tell you too much about it without spoiling it, but it is about a priest who is about to take his vows. And right before he takes these vows, he's on his way into the church to turn his life over to the priesthood, and he has second thoughts. I won't tell you why. But he does go ahead and takes the vows because this is the path he had started on. It's what it's expected of him, etc. And he does end up leading a double life. I really can't tell you anything more about the story than that without spoiling it. However, I will tell you the vampire in the story is female, and I absolutely loved it. There was, for such a short story, there was a lot packed into it. And I really felt like I had read a complete story, like I had read an entire book by the time I got to the end of those 45 or so pages. So I was really, really impressed with the way it was done. I just had one complaint, and my complaint is with the character of the priest. This priest places all the blame for his character flaws squarely on the shoulders of a woman. Like his character flaws were her fault, were a result of her corrupting influence, which was a load of crap. But of course, this is typical of older times than now. But other than that, it's easily overlooked for the fact that the story is just absolutely amazing otherwise. I actually read another little story by that same author called The Mummy's Foot. It's not a vampire story, but I just wanted to mention it anyway. It was super, super good. So if you haven't read it, you definitely should. The next thing I read was The Vampire by John William Polidori, which was around the same length as Clairemont, so I don't want to say too much. But again, I felt like there was a lot packed into that little short story. And again, I felt like I had read a book. Like I felt very satisfied with the story, the way it was presented. It was so good. I liked that even better than I liked Clairemont. And it is about a younger aristocrat who, while out and about socializing with the other aristocrats, meets a lord. I've forgotten his name. It starts with an R rather. So I'll just call him Lord R. He meets Lord R and finds Lord R very mysterious and intriguing, and he's just strongly interested in getting to know this man. And he does eventually befriend the man, and they travel Europe together, where some things happen. And this is not a spoiler. This Lord R is obviously the vampire in the story. I really, really enjoyed that aspect of this book, and I would definitely recommend it. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should. Then I listened to The Night Crossing by Robert Masello. I did this completely on audiobook. I may have read 10 or 20 pages in the Kindle edition, but it was audiobook all the way for me. I was really short on time, so I did a lot of audiobooks this month. But anyways, this is about Bram Stoker and a fictional adventure that he has upon which he bases Dracula. So all fiction, of course, none of it really happened, and it does have a supernatural element, and we get to meet the characters that we see in the book, only in different forms. We have a form of Mina, a form of Lucy, a form of Van Helsing, a form of some of Lucy's suitors, What else? Oh, there was another thing too. Bram Stoker is himself in the book, or Bram Stoker is being portrayed as himself in this book. So he is the manager of the theater, and he is a writer, and so he hobnobs with all the other writers of his day, and a handful of those make an appearance in the book. And there's also a journalist whose name I can never remember. I think his last name is Steed, who makes a significant appearance in the book. And I thought this was fantastic. It was absolutely well written, well portrayed, all the way until the last 100 pages. And it's not a short book. It's 450, 475 pages or so. And the last 100 pages were not necessary. I did like the sort of the epilogue. I thought the epilogue could have been kept. But other than that, all the rest of it was 5 stars, and you should absolutely read it. It was wonderful. The next thing I did also on audiobook, and that was The Traveling Vampire Show by Richard Lehman. So I really did enjoy this. I thought it was really good. But I did have a complaint about this book. So this is about 3 teenagers. They're 15 and 16 years old, 2 boys and a girl. And a traveling vampire show is coming to town. And they really want to go see this vampire show. So this entire book is very suspenseful. The thing that I both liked and became a little aggravated by was that every scene in the book builds up your suspense as if something is going to happen. So you get these intense buildups, and then nothing actually happens at the end of the scene. And then we go on to the next scene, and the same thing. There's this intense buildup of you think something is going to happen, but then nothing happens. And this carries on through the whole book, and it was really fun, but it also started to get a bit tedious, all of the buildup with nothing happening until the end of the book. At the end of the book, the buildup absolutely leads to a huge climax, and it was fantastic. It was one of the better endings of a book I've ever read. It was so good. So I would definitely recommend this, but I did have a complaint, and my complaint is that every single scene in the book, every page of the book, the boy who is narrating is objectifying the females in the story. Just every single scene is about the cleavage, the legs, the neck, the backside, the flash of thigh, oh my gosh, that got so old. I was getting really annoyed with it. I mean, I was able to overlook it because the story was so good, but there's not a page in that entire book where this boy is not talking about a female body part of some kind or another and drooling over it. It's crazy. But other than that, really good story. Let's see. And then I read, where is it? Right here. I read Carmela by, what's the author's name? Yeah, J. Sheridan LaFanu. And I misspoke in my TBR video. It's an Irish author, not a French author. And the vampire, again, is female in this. And she was an aristocrat. And I didn't care for this very much. Shawn really loved this, but I didn't get along with the writing very well. The writing was a bit strange for me, and the author kept using words multiple times in the same sentence, or he'd use the words back to back or he'd use the same words in sentences that were back to back. I hate it when writers do that, and this author did it throughout the entire book. And it really detracted from my enjoyment of this story, and it kept breaking my immersion in the story as well. In this story, there is a father and daughter. The mother has passed away, and they live out in the countryside in Romania somewhere. And they're taking a walk one day, and they see a carriage speeding along the road, and the carriage crashes. And inside the carriage is an aristocratic woman and her daughter. And the daughter is injured and she's unconscious, but the woman is in this terrible life, threatening situation like that she doesn't ever really specify. But, their lives depend on her hurrying. And she leaves her daughter in the care of these 2 perfect strangers that she's never ever met. And that she will be back in a few months to get her daughter. So that's really weird. I mean, even in those times, surely people weren't just leaving their children with complete strangers that they never met before and have talked to for 5 minutes. Surely that didn't happen. So that also I found really unbelievable about the story. And I do have a lot of other things to say about this, but I'm going to try to do an individual video of this novella. So that was Carmilla. What else is on here? Oh, In Mind of the Vampire by John Vance. So this is a pastiche novel, and this is about a what used to be called an analyst, which was essentially the beginnings of psychiatry. And he was a medical doctor, and he's just opened his, mental health practice. And he is visited by Mina from the book Dracula, and asks this analyst to see her friend Lucy. She's been sleepwalking and having nightmares. And so he begins to treat Lucy. And in the meantime, he falls in love with Mina. And I really liked this. I thought this was really, really good. It's a slow burn type of book. And it's suspenseful, more from a mental aspect than from an action aspect. It's not suspenseful in the same way the Traveling Vampire show was, for example. And in the background, Dracula is present, running around the city in the shape of a wolf. And he does, like I said, he's just sort of in the background. He shows up a few times as a wolf. The mist shows up every now and then. But Dracula never makes an actual appearance in this novel. And I loved it, except for I didn't like the ending. I hated the ending. Now, the ending was appropriate for the story that was being told, but it just wasn't to my personal taste, and it also didn't follow the Dracula lore, which kind of bugged me a little bit. The other thing that he didn't follow about Dracula is that in this book, Lucy is an orphan. Both of her parents have died, and she's living with Mina and Mina's aunt and uncle. That's also not how it happens in Dracula. But those are minor things that you can overlook. The story was just fantastic. Otherwise, I really liked it. And then I read An Unattractive Vampire by Jim McDaniel. And I did not expect to like this book as much as I did. I loved it. This was probably the most fun I've had reading a book all year. It was so funny and it was so fun. And in this novel, our vampire looks like Count Ulrich from Nosferatu. So he's ugly, and he has the big pointed ears and the bald head, and he's very menacing and evil, and he has gone underground 300 years before, when there was a Puritan village in place of a modern town, and so he's buried beneath his home, and his fortune is being handled by a foreign bank, and so they've been managing his estate over the years, even though he has not been present. And so he wakes up underneath his house, and when he comes out, he finds that there is a young nurse who's 22, 23 years old. I think she's 22. And her 10-year-old brother. They're orphans. Their parents have died, and she's raising her little brother. And he ends up befriending them, and he learns all about the modern times, and he's furious. Just furious because over the state of the world. And he's most furious about the fact that the modern vampires have been watered down. They are diluted vampires, and they're all beautiful. And he is a real vampire. Vampires are supposed to be horrible looking so that they can inspire terror in humans, and he is so angry that he is going to find out who has done this, who is responsible for this diluting of vampires. They're all much weaker and don't have the extensive plethora of powers that vampires are supposed to have. And they're all sort of morally gray instead of being evil, and vampires are supposed to be evil. So he's on the hunt for the person responsible for this, and he's going to get rid of him and all these vampires, and he's just so angry about it. And he just goes on rants throughout the whole book. It's so much fun. This book was fabulous. It was a 5-star read for me. Highly recommend. And then I read Fat Vampire by Johnny B. Truant. And I did not know. I thought it sounded good, but I didn't know. I was a little bit wary of this book. I thought it might not be the kind of book that I would enjoy, and I just didn't know how it was going to play out. But it was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. It was really short. It was only like 160 pages or so, maybe 175. And it's about this overweight, younger man. He's in his early 20s or mid-20s, and he works for a fitness company. And as he grew up, he was, picked on by the more popular sort of boys. And he is sort of made the butt of the jokes of the, buff co-workers because he works for this fitness company. And he's the only overweight person there. And he befriends the janitor of the company. and he is accidentally turned into a vampire, which is a big no-no. Because in these vampires, in order to become a vampire, you first have to go through vampire boot camp, where you become physically fit because your body is going to be yours for, all of your immortality. And so you're supposed to be perfectly fit and trained and all these things before you become a vampire, none of which he has done. So the vampire who made him and our character have to face this vampire council. And it was just so good. It was a fantastic book. I loved the character. I've forgotten the character's name. But he was a fabulous character. He was extremely relatable. I thought he was extremely realistic. And I just absolutely loved it. Then I read, losing track of where I'm putting my books here, my book piles. And then I read a Goosebumps book called Vampire Breath. And of course, R.L. Stine wrote the Goosebumps books. And this book was a lot of fun. This was about two kids who find a vampire coffin in their basement, and a vampire appears, and they get transported back in time to when the vampire was ruling the area. And it was a lot of fun. The thing that I really like about the Goosebumps books, like I didn't grow up with these. I was already, 18 years old by the time these started being published. And my son didn't really read them. He would have been of age to read these, but he didn't really like them that much. He read a handful of them and they just weren't his thing. So I never did read any, but I really liked them. I feel like they remind me of being told, like you have people sitting around a campfire telling spooky stories. And that's what a Goosebumps book is like. It's like hearing a spooky story by a campfire. So this was a really good one. And then after that, I read a second Goosebumps book called, Please Don't Feed the Vampire. And I did not know it, but this is just like a choose your own adventure book. And the series is called Give Yourself Goosebumps. I had no idea this was a choose your own adventure book or a choose your own adventure like story. I loved this. This is like the best Goosebumps book so far. And it was just good as a book, period. I had so much fun reading this. I was able to get every ending and take every path, and it was just so much fun. So there's two main paths in this book. You're a boy in this book, and the boy buys a costume in a can, and it's a vampire costume. So there's two paths. There's two main paths, I should say. One of the main paths is where you become the vampire because you're the boy in the story, where you become the vampire. And then the other main path is the dog becomes a vampire. Both paths led to a whole bunch of fun endings and fun little misadventures. And I had a fabulous time reading this. It was great. Then what did I read next? Then I read, so this book was not on my TBR list because I ended up picking it up cheaply on Kindle during my vampire reads. And it's called Dracula's Demeter by Doug Lemereau, and I did this on an audiobook. And this is in Dracula, the ship that comes into the harbor without its crew and with its captain tied to the wheel. What's the steering wheel called? I forgot what that's called, but he's tied to that. That boat is called the Demeter. And so this book is all about what takes place on the Demeter during its voyage. So we get to hear we get to find out why the captain is tied to the steering wheel thing. I know I probably sound so dumb. I forgot what that's called, to the wheel, and what happened to all the crew members. And he even adds a couple of extra characters. He adds a passenger to the Demeter even though the captain was legally not allowed to take on passengers since the boat was a private charter, he does it anyway to help out this character. And so he has an illegal passenger on the boat, and he doesn't write about it in any of his logs or anything. So when you're reading Dracula and, you're hearing the story about the Demeter via the captain's logs and the newspaper article, he's never mentioned, and that's why. And then also there was a woman aboard, and the reason you don't hear about the woman is because she was masquerading as a boy, and she signed onto the boat as the cabin boy. So, and then of course we have Dracula stowed away in the crates of earth in the cargo hold. and we find out what happens. And it was fantastic. Well, I say it's fantastic. The first half was fantastic. I loved the first half. I was completely into it. It tied into Dracula really, really well. The cook on the boat is the son of Sir Oracles in Dracula. You know, the old man, the 100-year-old man that Mina has conversations with when she sits in the graveyard overlooking the ocean or the harbor. That man's son is the cook on the Demeter, and he took the position on the Demeter so that he could get back to England to see his father and his daughter and his granddaughter, who Sir Oracles talks about in Dracula. So I thought that was a wonderful tie-in. But by the second half of the book, it started to wane for me. I wasn't particularly a fan of how everything played out, but I think it would have been fine, except for it starts droning on quite a lot. And he starts switching to Lucy in England. We get all these pieces of what's going on with Lucy, and I didn't care for that. I thought that should have been left out completely. I thought it was completely unnecessary. We even get a little bit of conversations between Lucy and Mina that aren't in Dracula, but he ties it in well, but I didn't like it. I wanted to stick only with the Demeter. I didn't care at all what was going on in England or with Lucy or with Mina. Couldn't have cared less. And that made the book longer than it needed to be, I felt. And it broke the immersion of all of the things that were happening on the Demeter. So it was good if you're interested in that sort of thing. It's definitely not a bad read. The other reason I think I might have liked it better if I had actually read it. See, I did it on audiobook, and the audiobook was not good. The narrator was not horrible, but he was not the best. And also there were tons of edits. Like, he had come back after finishing the novel, evidently, and like redid, a couple of sentences here, a couple of phrases here. And it was just constant throughout the whole book. And it just like broke the immersion of the story. It was super annoying. But anyway, so there was that. And then I read, where is it? Oh, here we go. Then I read The Death. Well, actually, you know what? Let me start over. So while right before I started Dracula's Demeter, I started Dracula by Bram Stoker. And I was very excited to read it in this edition, because this is my Word Cloud Classics edition, which has a vinyl cover, which is way more durable than either a paperback or a hardback. And it's beautiful. It has these beautiful end papers. The formatting is gorgeous. The paper's high quality. It has a sewn binding. It's just a really nice book. It's just a nice book. And I loved this book, the look of this book, so much that there's a series of notebooks called novel journals, and I actually bought the matching journal, which this journal is it's the entire book of Dracula by Bram Stoker, and it starts here, and then the lines of all of the pages in the book. Whoops, you don't want to read my actual writings in my journal. We don't want that. The lines are actually the text from the book. I don't know if you can see that or not, but yeah, the lines of each of the pages are made up of the text of the book. And then it ends on the back. So, and it even says, the end. So yeah, it's the entire text of Dracula in a notebook. It's just fabulous. I have several of these actually for various classics. But anyway, so yeah, so you can imagine I was really excited to read Dracula in this edition. Well, I got halfway through this and realized something was not right. Something was not right. Like, I would be reading paragraphs and all of a sudden it felt like the paragraph would skip or something. And I was like, I don't understand what just happened here. And at first I thought that it was just me having a little bit of difficulty with an older style of writing, which I normally do not have that problem, not with books written in this period. But, still, I thought, well, that's probably what's going on. But I realized then I decided that something was definitely wrong. It wasn't me. And sure enough, I talked to Shawn about it, and sure enough, entire sentences were being skipped and just completely left out of the text. Not because they were editing it, but because it's very poor proofreading. I don't think this was proofread at all before they slapped it in this book, and I'm furious. I'm furious that this beautiful, wonderful edition of Dracula is not readable because they've messed it all up, and it happens a lot throughout the entire book. So at that point, I put it down, and I'm just like, I'm not reading any more out of here. I put it down, and I buy a Norton Critical edition of Dracula. So, where I was halfway through the actual story of Dracula, with all of the notes and everything that are happening in the Norton Critical edition, I'm less than halfway through Dracula now. So that's my whole Dracula sob story. And then, let's see, in the meantime, while I was waiting for that, I started The Deathless Girls by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. And this is a YA novel, and it's about the brides of Dracula. It's their story. So I was, really looking forward to reading this, but at the same time, I thought there was a pretty good chance I wasn't going to like it because it's YA. And I don't generally like YA. There's definitely exceptions. But, 98% of the time, I don't like YA. But I was pleasantly surprised. I loved this. 4 stars. It was fantastic. I could have done without the romance. But the romance was not excessive at all. It wasn't even a main focus. But, oh gosh, it was so well written and it was such a good story. So in this one, we have a set of identical twins. And they are, I think, Roma. I did look this up, but I've now forgotten. Whatever the non-offensive term for a gypsy is. And I think it's Roma. So, which I learned something new too. The term gypsy actually came from a misidentification. They actually came originally from India. And Europeans misassigned them as Egyptians. And that's where the term gypsy came from. Anyway, the point is there are a set of identical twins, and they're called travelers in this book. And they are captured and enslaved by some, lord of some kind. And that's a whole ordeal for them to go through. But they end up at Dracula's castle. And they end up both being turned into vampires, which is not a spoiler because we already know this is about the brides of Dracula. So this was so good. I was enthralled like through the entire book. I could not stop reading it. It was so good. The thing is it was just the 2 girls. There is a third bride, but she's only touched on at the end of the book. She comes along later on, so we don't get to hear her story at all. But I'm not going to complain. I was completely happy with this book. And I do have to show you this book. The book itself is absolutely gorgeous. Like, for one thing, you get this really nice cover, which it's pretty, but, I'm not over the moon about it. But then you take the dust jacket off of this book and look at this thing. Look at this book. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. There's the spine. And then you've got these beautiful end papers. And the book is just fraught with illustrations, just all throughout. It's just so pretty. So pretty. Beautiful. And then this one looks like fallopian tubes. And I think that's done on purpose because there's something in the back. What did it say in the back? It says Bellatrix. Apparently that is a noun for female warrior. And it says, in literature and in life, women of the past and present have a million stories that are untold, mistold, or unheard. In response, we are proud to launch Bellatrix, a new collection of gripping, powerful, and diverse YA novels by leading female voices. So I'm sure that that's done on purpose, the little fallopian tube floral illustration there. But this book is gorgeous. Just absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. I mean, and then every chapter has a beautiful, a different and beautiful illustration. There's little illustrations, the page numbers. I mean, I just absolutely think this, look at the title at the top. This whole book is just absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, just gorgeous. So anyways, I was really pleasantly surprised. I've had such a good reading experience this month with all these vampire books. I'm so happy. I think that wraps up all of my vampire reads. I was going to go ahead and talk about the books that I want to read in May, but this video is already like 35 minutes long. So I don't want to make it any longer. So we'll just call that the end of the video right here, and I'll put out a separate video for what I want to read next month.